Hey everyone. This video is going to be responding to a message I received about recording and working with guitar and bass DI. The viewer wants to go in depth on some information about what to look out for when recording and how to go about editing DI afterward and how that affects the sound of the track. There's a lot of good questions in there. So one of the points of this channel is I wanted to share my recording knowledge and information with as many people as possible, especially people who are new to recording. So I'll be glad to help out with this. I've put together 5 simple steps for recording and working with the best guitar and bass DI signals that you could get. Let's dive right in. So step 1 is make sure that your guitar or your bass is properly set up for what you're going to be playing. This includes making sure you have new strings, that you make all the proper adjustments to the neck and bridge of your instrument to ensure that it's going to stay in tune and that it's going to play comfortably. Factors influencing this are going to include the type of guitar you're using, whether it's got a fixed tail bridge or a Floyd Rose or some other kind of floating trem system, the string gauge that you're going to be using, and the guitar tuning you're trying to achieve. All this is going to pretty much dictate how your guitar needs to be set up. So there's some contention about how much new strings really influence the sound of a recording. If you're recording metal music, for instance, and you're playing a guitar that's got humbuckers, you're using a high gain amplifier with a speaker cabinet, it can be said that something like new strings won't make a big difference as far as the sound goes, that your amplifier and your speaker cabinet is going to have much bigger impact. This is neither here nor there for me. It's all about the practical benefits of having new strings and a well set up guitar. The fact is that strings over time will wear down. They collect dust and they oxidize. They're going to have problems staying in tune and staying intonated as you play up the neck compared to new strings. I have to say that a well set up instrument with new strings and a conditioned fretboard just feels better to hold in your hands. New strings just have more of a snap, you could say. And the way that an instrument feels when you hold it is going to influence the way that you play it. So there's a psychological element here. So it makes the most sense to give yourself the absolute best possible starting point by setting up your instrument, giving it a polish, and using at least relatively new strings. Now, step 2 is making sure you're setting the proper recording levels. This isn't something that should be overthought, but it definitely shouldn't be skipped on. I definitely skipped on this a lot when I was first learning, and as a result, I've probably ruined a lot of great guitar performances just because I wasn't paying attention to how hot my signal was on the way in. If you're recording in a 32-bit or a 64-bit environment, which just about every DAW is now, then as long as you don't go above 0 on the meters and into the red, then you should be fine. I'm going to just throw out there that I aim for around negative 12 dB on the meters, using palm mutes with a heavy pick attack on the strings to kind of gauge what the loudest signal peak is going to be. Doing this, you should be able to get a reasonable level into whatever recording system you're using. Being that most people are probably using the consumer level interfaces from companies like Focusrite or M Audio or PreSonus or Behringer or something like that, I think it's a good idea to get a good DI box or an external preamp with a DI function. I use an ART MPA Gold preamp with an active DI function. Reason being that it just gives you more control over the input levels and it gives you a cleaner DI signal overall, also giving you some options for reamping the signal later through an amp if you wanted to do that. So yeah, just use the gear that you have, use good cables. All this stuff is relatively affordable now, and just pay attention to your input levels. So that was step 2. Now step 3, the performance is everything. And this should go without saying. Once you've gotten your instrument properly set up and you've got your input levels adjusted, from there it's all about the player. When we ask the question, what is a good DI recording? Well, it's one where the performer knows the song well. They know the part that they're playing. They play with consistency and are able to play along with the click track, the metronome, or whatever timekeeping device they're using. I noticed for a lot of people who are new to recording, this is the most obvious problem area. They can be relatively great musicians and good at their instrument, but when it comes to playing along to a click track or a metronome or playing along to a drum groove for a song, that's when the inconsistencies start to show. If you're playing a soft and clean passage, then you should work on being able to play soft and clean with consistency and good timing. If you're playing a fast, heavy riff, then you should, be able to really dig into the strings with, again, consistency and good timing. Beyond your recording signal chain, which should be a given, getting a great guitar or bass DI recording is literally all the things that should cost you nothing. If you've already got your instrument set up and you've got your gear dialed in, then from there it's all about having a good player and a great performance. So, as the saying goes, practice, practice, practice. Now, step number 4. Once we've captured our guitar and bass recording, then it's time to look at editing inside the DAW. I know that for today's modern metal, depending on your style, people will do a lot of edits, a lot of quantization and time alignment to their guitar and bass DIs. I don't personally do this. Again, it's mostly a stylistic and a genre thing. As far as how it impacts the sound, I can instantly tell right away when I'm listening to a new song or someone sends me a track to listen to and the guitar and the bass and the drums are all perfectly time aligned to each other and sync to the grid. This tends to sound a little bit robotic to me. It doesn't sound very natural or the way that a human would play. I may only do time alignments on guitar and bass DIs on maybe 1 or 2 sections of a song, if at all. Again, it's mostly depending on your material. I am certainly not above recording something just dozens and dozens of times until I get it right. It saves on having to edit things afterward. Again, this is depending on your material. If you're recording, a real complicated passage or a real technical riff or something like that, it's best practice to record these things in small 4 to 8 bar sections. And this is something that a lot of professional producers I know will do, is they'll have the performer record the riff all the way through, and then they'll go back and record certain sections to get better timing or better consistency in the performance. Doing it this way, you should be able to get a performance that is in relatively perfect timing and play with good consistency that won't need a lot of editing afterward. Now, with that being said, you should become familiar with the basic editing functions of your DAW. For me, this is functions like the split and drag feature, splitting and dragging audio along the grid, and using crossfades. You should become familiar with finding the initial transients of a note when you're editing audio. If you're playing a riff that has a lot of percussive or staccato kind of notes, these are easy to spot. In Reaper, I can find the initial transient of a note by using the tab key on my keyboard. Once you found the start of your note, then you can split and drag it along the grid and place it on the perfect measure. You can use crossfades to kind of smooth out the beginning of the transient so that it doesn't start too abruptly, which can lead to clicks and pops and things like that. It just gives a more natural sounding transition between notes. So there's a ton of details, videos, and information you can find out there for how to use these very basic editing functions inside your specific DAW. So that's step number 4. Alright, step number 5, basic post-processing and mixing. I'm going to roll this into any use of amp sims or any plugins. Even if you track through amp sims like I do, the processing is happening post-recording, so it's post-processing, you know what I mean. Now, I can make an entire video on this subject, and as a matter of fact I did. You can check out my last long-form video on guitar post-production. I'll leave links in the description. But just to touch on the topic, when you're learning to work with guitar and bass DIs, you should become familiar with the frequencies that make up a guitar and a bass sound. Electric guitar, for instance, is mostly a mid-range and upper mid-range instrument. Once you're familiar with that, then you'll know what frequencies in your recording to adjust to make your tracks fit well within the song. So just to recap, step 1, make sure that your guitar is properly set up for the material that you're going to be recording. This includes using new strings and making sure your instrument stays in tune. Step 2, pay close attention to your recording levels on the way in. Try to get a good DI box or an external preamp with a DI function just to get a cleaner signal. Step 3, make sure that you capture the best performance you can. There's no substitute for this. You want to capture a performance that has good consistency and timing with the tempo of the song. Step 4, then move on to editing. Any time correction or time alignments that you have to do. Just become familiar with how the grid works and how to use the basic editing functions to help you. Try recording your song in small sections so that you can get the timing and consistency down from the recording. And step number 5, become familiar with the use of EQ as well as the frequencies that make up the guitar or the bass or whichever you're recording. Become familiar with using EQ and, for heavier stuff, multi-band compression to tame the frequencies of your DI recording so that you can get a good tonal balance as you go along the process. So this is all pretty deep, but I think a good starting point to getting used to working with guitar and bass DIs. I know a lot of this doesn't sound very sexy when you think about setting up your instrument and, making sure you adjust the proper levels. It probably doesn't sound all that exciting, but in truth, a good DI is only as good as the weakest link. These are all the things that add up that allow you to get the best guitar or bass DI recording that you can. So there you have it, my 5 steps for working with guitar and bass DI. If there's something important that you think I missed that you would like to add to this video, then leave me a comment. If there's any other topics you would like to see covered, leave me a comment about that as well. So thanks for watching. I hope that you could take something valuable away from this. I will see you in the next video.